Well, thanks everyone for coming. My name's Andrew Hudson from Crisis Action. We work behind the scenes to mobilise and coordinate NGOs to prevent conflict and protect civilians in conflict. Today is the start of the official electoral campaign in Congo, with elections, legislative and presidential, set to take place in 1 month's time. We helped to facilitate a press release which is out today from over 40 different NGOs, calling on urgent measures to prevent escalating violence ahead of the elections in Congo. A copy of the press release is outside, or I have a copy of that. But I'd like to hand over to Elise Labbett from CNN to moderate today's discussion. Thanks, Elise, and thanks to all of our panellists for participating today.
Thanks, Andrew. I think it's an important time to be looking at the election period. As Andrew said, it just started. And I think that it could go either way. I mean, this could really consolidate some of the democracy. There has been progress over the last 5 years in Congo, and this can consolidate that democracy. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of concern that a renewed violence, if there's not a free and fair election, could really set Congo back. So we have a great panel here to talk about this today. We have Jose Kalanda of FreeFair DRC, the It Must Stop campaign, also a Congolese native. Grant Godfrey, a program manager, Great Lakes and Central Africa of National Democratic Institute, and he's got a very exciting mission going on to the DRC right now that he'll tell us about. And Sasha Lesnev, policy consultant for Enough Project, who's also done a lot on Congo and has been doing a lot on the eastern region. So let's start with you, Grant.
Thank you, Elise, and good morning, everyone. The Democratic Republic of the Congo faces the possibility of election-related conflict for the second time in 5 years. To avoid election-related violence, Congolese political leaders need to overcome their mutual mistrust, particularly between the Independent National Election Commission, or the CENI, and what's becoming known as the Fatima opposition, which is led by the UDPS. The CENI believes that the UDPS and its allies have adopted a strategy of trying to discredit the election process, whereas UDPS suspects that the CENI has manipulated the election process in favor of President Kabila and the PPRD. Finding a peaceful solution to this impasse is the key to avoiding any post-election conflict. At the invitation of NDI, Bill Richardson, former governor of New Mexico and ambassador to the United Nations, is leading a pre-election mission to the DRC that began yesterday. He and the other members of the group will be meeting with leading political figures who represent all sides of the political spectrum, including many of the presidential candidates and Chairman Melinda Ngoy of the CENI. Ambassador Richardson is one of a handful of international figures who can enjoy some credibility with both the ruling PPRD and the opposition, and this is due to his role in the departure of Mobutu. While in Kinshasa, the delegation will meet with Congolese political leaders to discuss plans for preventing election-related violence, assuring transparency in the election process, and continuing democratic dialogue after the election. International efforts to prevent election-related violence must reach out to all Congolese political forces, and this must definitely include the Fatima opposition and nonpartisan civil society groups. Because many Congolese do not view the international community as a neutral participant when it comes to Congolese politics and elections, solutions that are seen as imposed from outside the country could inadvertently raise the risk of conflict rather than lowering it. So the Congolese must be the final arbiters of whether their election process is free and fair. Going forward, the international community needs to prioritize building national democratic institutions in the DRC so that the mistrust surrounding today's elections does not jeopardize future ones. The winner of this year's presidential elections is not expected to win a majority of the vote, Consequently, ensuring broad and representative democratic participation through inter-party dialogue, giving voice to the opposition, and creating avenues for participation by citizens and civil society will be crucial to ensuring that political disputes can be addressed peacefully. Thanks, that's all.
Thanks, Grant. Okay, Sasha, why don't you take over?
Great, thank you, Elise, and thank you to Crisis Action for organizing the press conference. I'll focus on my remarks on Eastern Congo. Eastern Congo is not only the center of war in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but it's also the key political battleground, or one of the key political battlegrounds in the election, and therefore creates an opportunity for the Obama administration to push reforms and prevent conflict. The East voted largely, overwhelmingly, for President Kabila in the last election, but all that the population has seen over the last 5 years is continued displacement, war, destruction, mass rape incidents, and mass unemployment. Displacement is at over 1.7 million people, most of whom are concentrated in Eastern Congo. There have been several mass rape incidents over the last year, including as recently as this June. And what we're seeing today is increasing insecurity, with CNDP expanding and mobilizing their areas of control in North Kivu, and increasing attacks in South Kivu by the FDLR. So this is creating a choice for the government in Congo about whether to enact reform or repression in order to try, in an effort to secure votes in Eastern Congo. It creates a window for reform insofar as it needs to secure the votes in the East, and there are several areas that the Congolese government can push through reforms, and the Obama administration should use this window to further enact these reforms. So in a couple of different areas, reform is needed. Number one is a monitoring mechanism for conflict minerals. There's been a number of different areas of progress on conflict minerals over the last year, and a monitoring mechanism, which would be a joint Congolese and international mechanism, would help create a conflict-free minerals trade that would boost employment and allow international market access to Congolese minerals. Secondly, the Congolese government should adopt the specialized mixed courts. This is something that was voted down by the Congolese Senate, but was heavily supported by Congolese groups in the East and other areas of the country, and would create a political windfall for the Congolese government. The United States should also warn President Kabila of the consequences of violent repression in the East if, in fact, the CNDP pushes down opposition violently. And there's great need to deploy observers in the East from MONUSCO, from the Carter Center, and from other agencies in order to prevent violence and make sure that there's a transparent process. Thank you.
Thanks, Sasha. Jose?
Thank you. Okay, I will focus on women and how important these elections are for the women of the Congo. For the last 3 years, I've been campaigning to raise awareness of the plight of the Congolese women. As Sasha's already mentioned, women of the Congo, especially in the East, have been victims of rape as a weapon of war for 16 years continuously. These women today, as we speak, are desperate, and they are longing for peace. So are the Congolese people. There is a strong need for change and for democracy in our country, and the upcoming elections are a great opportunity for the people of Congo to choose a candidate of their choice who will make a difference in their lives, but only if we work together to make these elections free and fair. Democracy, I believe, will return power to the Congolese people in general and to the women in particular. As a woman, I know that many women will be approaching these elections with mixed feelings. And I fear that violence on the road, as we see it already, will keep many women away from the polling stations. My greatest fear of all is that the election result will not be accepted by any of the candidates. Bloody clashes between the police and the population have already begun in Kinshasa, as we all know. Disputed result in this fragile country could lead to further outbreaks of violence, and further violence will affect seriously women and the children whose bodies have become a battlefield. If the international community does not take any urgent action today, I fear that Congo is another Ivory Coast case on the horizon. Violence will undermine any prospect of development. Children will continue to not be educated, and the sufferings of the women of the Congo will continue. There will be massive destruction of the little infrastructures that we have in Congo. Despite this fear, I'm hopeful that if the 2011 elections go ahead, this will be a great moment in history, in the history of the Congo, and the great turning point for the futures of the Congolese women. The women of the Congo, at the moment, they would like to be able to go farming or to go to the market without looking at on their shoulders, without fear. They want a chance to just be normal women like any other women in the world. So, but they cannot be unless we make these elections, these upcoming elections, free and fair. So thank you.
Thanks, Jose. I'm going to ask a few questions of the panelists, and then I think what we'll do is, because we have a small, hardcore group of DRC enthusiasts, maybe we'll just have more of a discussion amongst all of us, because we have time for lots of questions, so it might be nice to have a free-flowing discussion. Jose, I'd like to start with you and talk about voter education. You know, as you know, the majority of Congolese of voting age are illiterate. Last year, at the last election, many of them couldn't even read and understand the ballot and didn't know how to vote. And so are you confident that there's going to be a kind of procedure in place so that illiterate voters can understand what's at stake and cast a ballot that they can be comfortable with, and how will that affect how the population accepts the result?
Yes, absolutely. There is a need for civic education, and that is not only to Congolese population, but also to the politicians as well, because they need to know that even if they don't win the elections, the solution is not just to take on the arms and fight. So yes, there is a need for civic education in the Congo.
But do you think right now there's a election process in place that will educate these voters? No.
Yes. Recently, there was some bishops from the Catholic Church. They came to London to speak to the Parliament, and they informed us that they had a project to train people. So the Catholic Church is in the process of doing that.
Okay. Grant, why don't we talk a little bit about CENI and what they're doing right now? Do you feel that they're reaching out to all of the opposition parties? Are you confident that they can organize elections that are free and fair, delivering the proper voting materials? It doesn't look as if they've released a real concrete information that leads us to believe that there is a credible process in place.
Thanks, Elise. The CENI made some very laudable efforts at the very beginning of when they were installed back in around March to reach out to the opposition. And that helped them negotiate the political, or the election calendar, I should say. Since then, for a variety of reasons, the exchanges between the CENI and the political parties to talk about election process issues have reached a bit of an impasse. So further dialogue is really needed. As far as where the CENI is, I think that the political parties would definitely appreciate more information coming out from them, but we can't really comment on the credibility or the conduct of the election process at this point. NDI does not have an observer delegation on the ground, and there's still a month left to go. So I'll just leave it at that.
Because obviously it's not just CENI, but the government that's going to need to provide that permissive environment for access to media, for people able to campaign, for people to vote without intimidation.
Well, the international community is involved to some degree, much less so than in 2006, as far as helping secure the election process. And we certainly hope that on election day that will help. I think the greater fear is actually, and this was part of what Jose referenced earlier, that after the election, because these two sides do not have enough trust in one another, that somebody will reject the process, and that will precipitate on one side or another acts of violence that could lead to, in the DRC, could lead to some pretty dangerous situation. I think that's really the greater danger right now.
Grant, why don't you talk a little bit about the international community? I mean, 5 years ago, international community very heavily involved in restoring peace, but I mean, reports that we read is feeling that now they've turned their back a little bit. I mean, 2006 elections were heavily monitored and supporters, but where do you think the international community is going to be now, given that the Congolese are the ones running the election this time and not the international community?
Yeah, I think that sadly the potential for violence is high, both before, during, and after the elections. The fact that there has been much less time of preparation for the government and CENI to actually deploy all the necessary instruments to get the materials out to voters is a worrying trend. I believe that the time that it actually took to get the voting materials out to the provinces was something like 1/10 the time that it took in the last election. Even in the last election, there were delays. The number of observers, I hope, is going to be high, but that's still it's still up in the air. It's still up in the air as to whether the elections will in fact be held on time. Some other countries have delayed their elections just a few months, and we may see that in Congo as well. But in terms of the political freedom in the East in particular, has been very difficult. One of the leading opposition candidates is from South Kivu and has been prevented from holding public events and rallies, and that stirred up a lot of controversy in the East. So we hope that does not turn into increased violence.
And what's the situation with the security and the government security? I mean, this recent violence and the clashes between police and opposition demonstrators, is it an issue of them not providing the space for the demonstrators? There's also questions about the capability of the security forces. Where do you think the government is in terms of allowing some of these demonstrations?
Well, let me turn over to Grant. Some of that's in Kinshasa. So.
I think that really right now what we need is for the different parties to stop. I think everybody needs to discuss the election process and come to and realize that there is common ground between them. And I think there is.
There's not enough of a united Not
terms
united
of-
in terms of their platform, but united in terms of the goal of a free and fair election.
Oh, I think everybody everybody that you talk to says that they're in favor of a free and fair election. And I think on the side of the opposition, what you see is a difference in tactics on how to address what they perceive as insufficiencies or areas where the election process has not lived up to where they think it should be. So there are sort of two large groups of opposition right now. One is the Fatima opposition, which is the one that has been marching in the streets in Kinshasa. And I think if there's going to be violence in Kinshasa, most likely it would be between supporters of that faction and supporters of the government. In the East, that may be a different story, and I'll let Sasha talk about that. The other opposition group, or coalition, shares many of the misgivings that the Fatima opposition has, but has not been marching in the streets. But if you ask them, they will say that they have a number of concerns regarding the voter registration and other things. And then, of course, on the CENI and the government side, they have moved very quickly to hold these elections. I think they have surprised people with their ability to get more done on time than was really expected with a very ambitious election calendar. And I think that has contributed to some of the misgivings on the opposition side, but it's too early to say that this election process is broken beyond repair. I think what's clear is that the different stakeholders involved have a mutual interest in having it come out peacefully for the good of their country, and they need to keep that in mind as the campaign starts today and as the election date nears.
I mean,
Right.
just to
Oh,
build
sure,
on
go
that,
ahead.
the culture of impunity in the Congolese army is incredibly high, and essentially the way that you get promoted in the Congolese army is to abuse more civilians. The more human rights abuses that you commit, the more you get promoted, and you've seen this all over the army. The deputy commander of the operations in Eastern Congo is wanted by the International Criminal Court, Bosco Ntaganda, and despite the arrest warrant out for him, he continues to be in place. Numerous other military officers with high rankings recently got promoted this year, and they're throughout Human Rights Watch reports as having as being documented human rights abusers from the last 15 years, essentially. And so when you have that sort of a culture of impunity, you can only guess what's going to happen when the elections come around, and there's any sort of question mark as to does this community support us or not. And so that's a worry.
And Jose, that obviously creates this intimidation that makes people think twice about going to the polls.
That's correct, yes. Because from the report that we had from the bishops that came to speak to the UK Parliament, they say that they were very concerned because of the tensions between the opposition and the government, as we all know. But what they said was that the government is inciting young people to go on the street. So I would say in terms of security, the government itself is not really making an effort to try and secure the population to allow people to go to the polls.
All right, let's open it up. Like I said, we have a small group of people who are obviously interested and know about the issues of the Congo. So let's just open it up.
Can you comment on the status of the election equipment? Because we have heard that there are delays in the voting machines and the ballot boxes arriving from third countries. What is the current status of that, and could that be a potential reason for the elections being delayed? Second part of the question is directed at Sasha. Earlier this fall, the Ugandan defense minister addressed a parliamentary committee stating that he had reason for concern that the Allied Democratic Forces were reforming in the Congo, and that was part of the reason for their new military buildup. Did you see any evidence of that in the eastern part of the Congo? And the third part is we have seen so many times various other actors get involved. We've heard the CNDP and the other forces, and we know with the recent decision by the president to send special forces to Uganda to train for the LRA. Can you give us a brief update of current LRA operations and if they have any potential impact on these elections?
Thanks, Scott. The short answer is no. I don't have any information that would help you beyond what's already been reported. Certainly, there have been published reports that there have been delays in coming in the ballot boxes and other things being produced and arriving in Congo. I met with Chairman Melinda a couple weeks ago, and they were very confident that they could get this all done on time. And they've surprised us in the past with their ability to get things done when they said so. So I'm not going to I'm not going to prejudge that. I think that it's clearly a concern in a place with the infrastructural and logistical challenges that Congo has, but I'm not in a position to say one way or another that they're going to pull it off or that it's not going to happen. Sorry.
Sasha, you want to talk about the others?
Sure. Regarding ADF, I don't have much evidence about ADF buildup, to be honest with you. They've always been a very small group, and I had not heard about a Ugandan buildup in that particular area, so I can't really comment.
Using that as a justification for the upgrading the Air Force to purchase of the MiGs from China?
Yeah, I can't comment on that in particular, but on the LRA, the LRA appears to be consolidating and trying to reorganize in some, according to the latest information, and that I think that's part of the reason for the deployment of the advisors. I think that the deployment of the advisors is a welcome step insofar as they can buttress regional efforts, but it's really going to take more to get this problem resolved. It's going to take a surge in intelligence. It's going to take a surge in diplomatic effort to deploy other African special forces. This can't just be a Ugandan army effort alone, and the fact that the African Union is now blessing this mission, other African Union countries need to get involved in it so that it is in fact a transparent, accountable mission that actually is able to roam effectively in the border areas that the LRA operates in. So, will they have an effect on the election? I would tend to doubt it. They have their own agenda, and I don't think that anyone's going to try to use them to disrupt in the election.
Sasha, let's talk a little bit more about the East. I mean, this is where Kabila had his strong support in the last election. What's it like for him there now?
I think it's very tough. I was out there a few months ago, and people were very upset that Kabila had made many promises and hadn't delivered for services in the East. There's a saying out in Eastern Congo that Kabila issued a zero tolerance for corruption policy, and so people say zero tolerance, zero enforcement, or zero tolerance, zero consequence, even better. So it's very difficult for the president there, and that's why there's been unfortunately repression to block any sort of popular demonstrations and so forth. We would hope that the administration can speak strongly to the government and help turn that repression around into a situation of opportunity. I think that Easterners, have a history of voting for the president, and so they they could vote for him if they see measurable improvements and they see the government is interested in turning things around. But if things stay as they are and Bosco Ntaganda is not arrested and rather than moving from a Congolese mining ban to actually the development of a legitimate Congolese minerals trade, then I think that those things would really help turn those things around.
Let's talk a little bit more about the minerals and how this has the potential to affect, in some way, the next election. I mean, we had this legislation passed by the U.S., but I mean, just from someone who covers foreign policy, I don't hear that much. I don't hear the administration really speaking out that loudly about it.
Well, I think it's time to follow up the legislation with a number of reforms that can help act as a carrot to develop a legitimate Congolese minerals trade. So the legislation is a way to get companies to trade more transparently, and it's a stick to help cut off the funding of armed groups. The United Nations group of experts on Congo wrote to the SEC just this week saying that, in fact, the commanders out in eastern Congo are facing financial pressure because of the legislation. And so the administration needs to step up now and help put the different initiatives together in a negotiation process to lead to certification. Building on the lessons that we had for blood diamond certification, we need to put that together now for conflict minerals.
What do you think, Jose? I mean, what do you think in terms of, you obviously have family back in the country. What do you think Congolese are thinking about in terms of President Kabila, his support in the country, and whether you think that his re-election is imminent or precarious?
I think the majority, as I said, of Congolese people, they want change. And that change means Kabila should be out of power. Yes, because he's been there for nearly 10 years. He promised what he called the 5 chantiers, and we did not see much of this 5 chantiers. Instead, what is happening is just that, as I told you, the country is going backward instead of progressing. It's really the infrastructures are not even there. So people now, they've realized that we don't see how we can give him another chance. The ballots are not ready, the fichiers are not ready. The opposition, as Graham said, are ready to contest the elections, and if that happens, yes, the population at the moment, they are ready to go on the street to protest as well. And as we know, what happened in Ivory Coast is that they would want to see their president to take power, and if that doesn't happen, then it's going to lead to a civil war, and that's what we call now that it's likely to be like Ivory Coast case. Yeah. As far as the solution, I think the international community should try at this moment to try and send more observers, at least to go and observe what is happening, because I understand they're not going to send as many observers as it was in 2006. So which means that the Kabila the Kabila administration, if I can call it so, yeah, could do what they like, if we don't have many observers in these polling stations.
Grant, let's branch it out a little bit, and let's talk about elections in Africa in general. I mean, the Council on Foreign Relations just came out with this report talking about the fact that, elections are seen as the determination of the people's will. But a lot of times in Africa, you don't have the kind of building blocks in place for free and fair elections to take place. There's corruption. There's not a lot of education. There's not a lot of infrastructure and capacity for free and for credible elections, which will give the confidence of the people to take place. So how do you square that circle in terms of, people do want to exercise their right to choose their leader, but at the same time, maybe some of the capacity in the country isn't there to help them make a free and fair choice?
Thanks, Elise. That's a great question. I'm not familiar with the paper that you're talking about, so I can't speak to it specifically. But in general, there's a lot of good examples to look at in Africa, as well as less inspiring ones. The case of Nigeria earlier this year really is an example of a very difficult country, perhaps as difficult as Congo in some ways, moving in a good direction as far as its election processes. The Nigerian elections took place over a series of weekends, and on the first day they weren't ready, and the chairman of the election commission, Chairman Jegu, had to make the very courageous call to stop the elections like that morning or the night before, but he did so in consultation with the leaders of the other, or not the other, but the political parties that were competing, explained the situation to them, and had their support when he made that decision public. And as a result, Nigeria had the best election that it has seen since its democratic transition. So, I think there's a lot of, I think it's too easy to say, oh, Africa's just too tough. Africa is not competent enough to have democratic elections. People have intelligence and capacity to make decisions and participate in decision making, whether or not they have a Western education, whether or not they can read and write. In our own country, it's been 200 years, and we didn't always have all the fancy stuff that we have now. I don't think that there's any reason to say that elections, that Africa isn't ready for electoral processes. I think it's clear that a lot of African countries do need assistance in terms of bringing those processes up to a level that is credible. But I think it's really, elections are essentially a human right. It's the right of people to choose their own government, and that doesn't change on Africa compared to anywhere else in the world.
Thanks. Sure, Jose?
Oh, yes. What I want to see is, I think there is a need of change of political culture, if I can call it so. Africans need to know that when you take office, it has to be for a short period of time, not for life, because that's what creates a problem. Because what we've seen, even when Mobutu was in power, it was 35 years. Mugabe is there for many, many years, and that is like a culture in Africa. I think there is a need to educate the young politicians in Congo that when you serve two terms, that's it. You have to get out of the office. So yes, that's the comment I wanted to make.
Sasha?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of progress in elections in many countries in Africa. Unfortunately, we hear about the worst cases. The Arab Spring is largely not spread to sub-Saharan Africa. There's certainly, everyone's aware of it, and people reference it, and people talk about, Egypt could happen in Congo, etc. Do I think that's going to happen? Probably not. The instruments of repression are still very strong. I hope that things in Congo don't go the way of Libya, for example, in a bloody in a bloody conflict. Everyone has their own context, but places like Nigeria, Uganda have shown that in fact elections can be held peacefully. Peaceful transition again happened in Zambia last month, Tanzania similarly. So you are seeing peaceful transfers of power, and we hope that the sort of institutions that are being set up of good governance will in fact transfer, and those countries will be the models. It was good that President Obama visited some of the more positive African countries, so that it's not simply a bad news continent.
And there is the idea that it can't just be an election, as you said. It has to be elections does not a democracy make, but it has to be accompanied by institutions that continue to perpetuate a democratic society.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm gonna, unless there are any more questions, this is your last chance. Okay, everyone's shy today. Let's just take a few minutes, and maybe if everyone has a couple of closing thoughts, we can end it there. Sasha?
Sure. So, I think that this election is an opportunity for sends warning signs in several different regards, both from the international community's support, the monetary assistance, and the use of different militias. But it also presents an opportunity. Here we are before the crisis to actually prevent violence and push reform. So we would hope that both the Congolese government and the international community with the Obama administration can take advantage of those opportunities, so that we can, see success rather than failure in one of Africa's most strategic countries.
Okay. What I'll say is the people of Congo are tired. At the same time, they are excited about these elections, but I just want to say we need help, assistance to see these elections free and fair without any violence. That's the only thing I would say.
Yes, I think just to close, I'd like to make the observation that the impasse that we're looking at right now isn't something that was arrived at just over the last couple of months. The Congolese institutions and the international community both had 5 years to anticipate these elections and prepare for them. And I think after 2006, there was such relief at the fact that there had been an election that people pulled back somewhat and focused their time and energy and resources on other things without recognizing, as you said, that an election does not a democracy make. And I think it's going to be very important, no matter what the outcome of this electoral process is, that going forward, there needs to be a renewed effort on strengthening institutions, because that's how you create the systems and the building blocks that you were talking about that can help us hopefully 5 years from now, 1 month before the elections, not be worrying if election day is going to turn into a day of sadness rather than a day of where people can be proud of their exercising their right to vote.
Well, I'd like to thank all our panelists for coming, and thank you for coming. And we have a month left till the election, so hopefully we'll be able to continue to keep a spotlight on DRC, not just leading up to the election, but after the election, and how the winner undertakes some of these reforms that we're talking about today. Thanks very much.